Hello everybody. In today's video we're going to look at one of those elusive concepts that for some people reason confuse some folks. That's going to be holding patterns and holding entries. So currently we have ourselves sitting here in the Textron G36, and what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at a couple different holds, and we're going to make things nice and complicated. So let's go ahead and flip over to our chart real quick so we can kind of see exactly what I'm looking at and know kind of where I'm coming from. So what is a hold? A hold is basically a traffic pattern designed to keep traffic in one spot in order to make a room to kind of get things all moved around. You can see them marked on all sorts of different types of charts. For example, I noticed that there's a potential hold here at Salem intersection, which is kind of tricky because it's a GPS hold. We also have one at Norwich VOR. This is another holding point up here. Sometimes when you're doing different types of actual approaches, for example, if I want to go ahead and take a look at runway 6 here, if I open this up, you'll notice this one has a building holding pattern here. You'll notice there's going to be another holding pattern up here in the event that you have to do a missed approach. They're all over the place. So what's the deal with them anyway? So basically what you need to do when you're doing a holding pattern is you need to figure out how to get into the holding pattern. Afterwards, you just need to go ahead and follow a very simple formula to actually fly the hold until you're told to leave the hold. So in this particular case, we're actually cruising right over Curdy, which is going to be right about here. We have our first holding spot, which is Salem. Keep in mind, air traffic control are going to be the ones that tell you to hold unless it's a procedure turn, in which case you don't really have a choice in that particular manner. Again, procedure turns, if you're looking on any sort of one of these different approaches, let's go grab that one I had a second ago, real fast. The procedure turn is going to be what you need in order to line yourself up for the actual landing. This one is required because it's a dark color. If it is a dashed line, it is going to be one related to missed approach, and if it's a thin dark line, that simply means that it's a regular pattern like the one we have here. So let's go ahead and say we want to hold at Salem here. We're actually proceeding right along this way right here. I'm on a heading of about 60 degrees. If the hold itself were to start at Salem and then simply proceed in this direction, remember holds usually take right turns, then we'd simply proceed up here for a minute, turn ourselves around, and then come back down and land. Now this gets a little more complicated and it seems a little simplified, so let me go ahead and show you what I mean. If we were traveling at 60 degrees, and we needed to fly a hold that was a heading of, let's say, also 60 degrees, make it nice and simple for ourselves, to get to that particular hold, actually we got that backwards. To get to that hold, what we would do is we'd cross that point, turn ourselves around, fly the hold directly, and then come back around again. Now, if we were, for example, say, have to enter this hold, but the hold itself, instead of being at 60 degrees, was at something like this, let's say 150 degrees, then in this particular case, when we arrive, we do the same thing. We would get to the holding point, we take a left, and then start flying the hold itself, assuming it's a right hold pattern. Now, that's what they call a direct entry. Direct entry is any time you can fly directly to the waypoint and fly into the hold almost immediately with minimum turning. Now that's all great and wonderful, but what happens when the hold is not lined up with us? Well, then it gets a little more complicated. So if you want to take a look at this situation, we have a thing where we're approaching it at this particular heading here, and we need to actually hold in this direction to 5-1 here. To enter this holding pattern, we do what they call an offset entry. So what we would actually do is we'd hit this point here, take a left and fly along here, turn ourselves around, and then proceed almost like a direct entry. Now that's complicated. Wait till you see this one. Let's say we're approaching the hold point from the right-hand side. That would mean that in order to safely land on this, we cross through the intersection, proceed straight, then turn the aircraft around in a teardrop pattern before entering this particular entry. Sounds a little complicated, right? It's actually not as bad as you think it is. Let me show you why. If you happen to have everything that you need right in front of you, you can actually calculate your hold very, very simply. All you have to do is take whatever your VOR is going to be, and you're going to dial this into the direction you intend to hold. So let's say, for example, our hold was like our example. That's going to be a 251, just for an example. Well, it would help if I kind of put it in the correct direction in the first place, right? Let's say it was 251. So that would mean when we get to the point, we're going to end up having to turn the aircraft around in order to fly this imaginary holding pattern. So after you do this particular procedure, all you would do is basically take a look at the direction you're going to be flying the hold in, move your mouse, or in this case in the real world they call it the pencil method, move yourself 20 degrees to the right, and then take a look at where you're going to be crossing that particular fix. If you're going to be crossing it where you're very, very close to the fix, in this case it's usually less than 70 degrees, you are going to be doing a teardrop entry. Again, that means you're going to fly through the fixed point, go out a minute, turn yourself around, and then come back around again. Now, if the hold was in the opposite direction and we looked at this example, we'd simply take our pencil, or our mouse in this particular case, and move 20 degrees to the left. So in this case, it was going to be about 30 degrees, which would mean if we're flying a hold that's like this, we would have to, a hold that's like this, we would have to fly ourselves the offset entry. So in this particular case, if we're going to be holding at Salem, let me go ahead and zoom out just a teeny tiny bit, what we would have to do is, since we're proceeding direct, we'd have to figure out what direction the hold is and then fly it. In this case, in the real world, if you take a look at the actual approach here, let me go flip back here. Again, hopefully I'm not confusing you too much. This particular pattern is flown this way. So we're actually running into this thing head first. Since we're going to be running into it head first, we get a choice between doing the teardrop entry, in which case we're going to cut through it and then turn around to the right, or we can do the offset entry where we fly along it and go ahead and take that very, very tight turn to come back around into it. Now the weird thing here is this is a left hand hold pattern. Most of them are not. So that being all said, let's actually go ahead and fly this hold so you can see what it's going to look like. So again, I'm just going to quickly walk myself through the motion. The holding heading in this point is going to be the opposite. Unfortunately, because of the way we're hitting it, we're basically going to face plant directly into it. Bummer. So you can see it's going to be heading this way. It's going to be left turns in our particular holding pattern. I'm sorry, right turns in our particular holding pattern. That means we have a choice, since we're facing directly at it, of either coming into it and then turning around this way, or coming in and turning around the other way with the offset. In this case, I'm basically going to go straight into it, take a long right turn, and then enter into our fake artificial holding pattern. So I'm going to go ahead and flip on nav mode. Sorry about that little bang there real quick. I'm going to go ahead and turn off our little thing here. Go ahead and flip the automatic pilot on. Go ahead and shut off heading hold. There we go. Looks pretty good. Heading mode on. Go ahead and flip ourselves to synchronize our heading. Again, we want to proceed it at about 60 degrees. I can actually flip the CDI to GPS mode here. Actually, what I can do is I can just flip on the nav mode for that. Let's make sure my altitude hold is on. I was hoping for closer to 7,500 feet, to be honest. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, so watch this. So we're going to go right through the front of it. And then, since it is going to have us taking left turns, again, like I said, we can fly the teardrop approach where we go like this, or we can fly the offset approach where we fly along it and then turn around like this to get ourselves back onto this line. In this case, I'm going to keep things nice and simple for myself, and I'm going to go ahead and do the offset. So we're going to cross our hold fix, which, again, we're just assuming it's Salem for my example here, and then we're going to proceed this way for exactly 1 minute. This is why it's really, really helpful to have yourself a timer handy. All right, get ready. I'm going to go ahead and synchronize my heading to make this nice and simple for myself. Again, this is much easier in an aircraft where we have something like this. There it is right there. Okay, begin, hold, now. So now what we're going to do is we're going to fly 1 minute. So remember, my hold is going to be taking left turns here. So we're going to proceed exactly 1 minute in that general direction. Once we get to the end of that 1 minute, we're simply going to take ourselves a very, very aggressive right turn like this, bring ourselves back to this line, which is actually our holding heading, recross Salem intersection, and then come around and actually fly our initial hold itself. But we're not going to do that for another 30 seconds. Now keep in mind, this can get very, very complicated if the hold is in the opposite direction, which is why you really need to be thinking about how your entries are going to look. Now, one thing I often get asked about holds is how fast are you supposed to be going? That totally depends on your traffic control, it depends on the conditions, it depends on a lot of different things. Some people hold holds basically at their endurance speed, which for us is very slow. We can get down to like 70 knots if we wanted. The key thing is don't fly outside of the protective airspace. All right, ready? So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and take the aircraft around. We're going to take a right-hand turn, and now we're doing our offset approach. So what we're going to try to do is take a right turn, line ourselves back up at this line. Again, this would be all imaginary. And then we're going to fly through Salem and then start our left turn patterns. Man, you really got to know your right from your left or you get in a lot of trouble. One really nice trick I've learned after doing this a few times is you can actually use this to basically point to the tail. But in this case, we're not actually pointing to the tail. We're going to be pointing mostly towards the tail. Now, this particular type of hold is at a waypoint. This is not a hold that is on a VOR. Things change a little if you actually want to hold off a VOR, but we're going to save that for a few minutes from now so we can actually see what that looks like as well. If you're holding off a VOR, you'd essentially be centering this line right here. Kind of come around. Again, we're going to try to get back on this radial, cross Salem, and then actually enter a hold. The interesting thing here is when you cross that Salem point after entering into the hold, that doesn't actually count as a hold. That's still considered your entry, which is kind of an interesting little problem, at least in the US. It may be a little different in Europe. All right, again, we're just swinging around here very gently. And we're going to try to reacquire this position, and then we're going to follow it on that heading, like I said earlier. Again, we're using the heading hold mode, and I'm just doing this completely visually. Now, in the real G1000 and the actual aircraft, you can actually press menu, and you can bring up a display that lets you set a hold at a specific waypoint, which is awesome, because then you can just dial these things in visually, and you can actually have the aircraft fly it by hand, which is even better. All right, we're finishing our offset and approach here. Again, we can always fly these by hand if we want to. And then we'll enter into the next part of our hold. And then we'll give ourselves a nice challenging problem to solve, which is always nice. Looking up a little bit closer. Keep in mind, we're basically having to go against our normal direction here on account of the fact that this is the way that it happened to work out. It can be different depending on where you are and all those other kind of things. Okay, get ready. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to cross our holding fixed now, and we're going to take a standard rate left turn to the opposite direction that we're going to be entering. This is basically our inbound. Our outbound leg is going to be the opposite direction that we just came in. So we're going to cross that in just a minute. Perfect. Okay, let's do it. So the moment the aircraft stops turning is when we're going to activate a 1-minute timer. When that 1 minute is expired, that will tell us that it's time to start turning left and getting back to our original position. Remember, this is still the entry. All right, just going to line it up perfectly with that needle. You can see I've got it going very, very nicely. Like I said, by coincidence, this happened to work out for us. It doesn't always. And when we do our VOR hold in just a minute, you're going to see that it can actually get very, very tricky very, very quickly. So now here's a fun fact. On this aircraft, this little line here tells us exactly what our turn rate is. If this magenta line touches this line here, it means it's going to take 2 minutes to do a complete turn. So ideally, it should take us 1 minute to turn, 1 minute to go in that leg, 1 minute to turn again, and another 1 minute to end up where we started. In the real world, we have this thing called wind, which makes this all much more complicated. All right, we should be leveling off, standby to start. See if the wings are level. Got it. Okay, so we went through, we crossed our waypoint, now we're in the hold. We took a 1 minute to turn, now we're taking 1 minute to do our little racetrack pattern here. Then we do another 1 minute turn and come back to where we started, and then we just literally just continue that pattern all afternoon. This is super easy in an aircraft that has displays like this, because you can literally see it visually. So if we did have a nasty crosswind or something, we can go ahead and adjust ourselves. So you can see we're about 30 seconds into the turn. Some places you will actually see where it won't be a 1 minute hold. You'll actually see where it'll say something like 1 minute 30 seconds. This is especially true if you're over 14,000 feet. Again, this can differ depending on what airport and what the point of the hold is. Keep in mind, at any point, air traffic control could call you up and say, proceed direct such, and suddenly you'd find yourself in a position where you're going to have to do some very fast navigation. All right, take a look. So in 7 seconds, we're going to go ahead and take the aircraft and bring us back onto our original inbound leg. Ready, go. And now we just finish up this fancy little racetrack pattern. And that's all there really is to it. Make sure you reset your timer, by the way. So that's basically it for a waypoint hold. This is much easier to do when you have an aircraft where you can see all this. Otherwise, you're almost guaranteed to need an aircraft that's going to have a dual situation where you have double VOR displays or double CDIs. I should be a little more specific. By the way, now after we touch this waypoint, we'd be entering into our first hold, which would also be known as the no wind hold. Because basically you're going to fly it by hand and start calculating what your wind effect is actually going to be on the aircraft. Now notice, this has actually been a very good hold so far, because we're just about going to come out of this turn right where we need to be. So let's go ahead and plan our next crazy hold here. Go ahead and flip back over to Chrome while things are kind of cruising. So what we just did is we just flew that particular hold that we saw. That would be the Salem one here. Remember, we actually came at it from the opposite direction. So now we're going to go ahead and do the Norwich hold here. Now this particular Norwich hold says that it's going to be in the same direction as the one we just did. Now I'm not really a fan of that. I'm actually going to make things interesting by making it a crazy direction. So let's pretend for a second that the outbound leg is at 128 degrees. So I'm going to go pop back over here real quick. Again, our outbound leg is going to be 128 degrees. Let's have a little bit of fun with that. All right, looks pretty good. All right, delightful. Now remember, my incoming heading is going to be about 60 degrees. Bingo. Take a look at this. Because we're hitting it from this side again, we're going to be flying that weird offset that we flew a minute ago. But let's make things complicated and make it a right turn hold. So check this out. Now what's going to be happening is we're actually going to be flying, crossing the fix, turning basically 30 degrees off of the fix. In this case, it's a 308 minus 30. You're going to have 28 tree. We're going to proceed here for a minute, turn around, and then start doing our hold. So that's going to make things a little bit more interesting. This is called the teardrop entry. Now the fun thing here is we have a VOR to help us out this time. So let's go back to the simulator. I'm actually going to press nav mode. So let's assume that air traffic control called us up and said proceed direct Norwalk VOR hold. So basically now we're going to cruise up there and go set our hold up. So let's go ahead and get everything pretty much all set. Again, in the real world, usually you don't have to hold this often. I think I can count on one hand, probably 2 fingers, how many times I've ever actually had to hold in the real world. It just doesn't happen very often. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at things visually on this side now. So there's our Norwalk VOR. Remember, we're assuming we made up our own hold here that's going to be taking us on a 308 out of Norwalk VOR. But since Norwalk is a VOR, we can go ahead and use that information to help line ourselves back up, which is actually really, really handy for us. So what I'm actually going to do is once the aircraft gets itself somewhat lined up again, I'm going to turn to heading select mode. I'm actually going to change my CDI and then dial in the frequency to Norwalk VOR, which is actually 110.0. Again, this particular hold, we're basically going to be using the VOR to keep ourselves nice and lined up. You can see that we're not terribly well lined up here. So I'm going to go press nav mode. And we should be coming to the right just a teeny tiny bit, which is exactly where we are. Nice. So in this case, we're going to fly directly to that station. Once we get to that station, remember we're going to be flying a teardrop entry this time. So what's going to happen is the moment this needle goes boing, because we crossed the station, what we're going to do is we're going to basically do this little turn here. Because if you think about it, we're basically going to be crossing through here, taking that right turn, going out a minute, turning yourselves back around. Now if you wanted to try to visualize that, let's go ahead and pop on heading hold real fast, make sure that's turned on. I'm going to go ahead and grab it and line this up with our outbound, I should say our inbound leg again, so you can kind of see it visually. Go ahead and flip that around. I'm going to go double check to make sure I've got everything set correctly. We said our inbound leg was 308 degrees. So we'll go ahead and get that set up to 308. And there we go right there. Perfect. So you can see where we need to be in our hold is what my mouse is doing right now. Again, we're going to be taking right-hand turns like this. We're going to be getting to it, turning ourselves basically east after we cross it, and then coming out all the way around and then swinging back and lining up with this radial. Once we cross the station again, we'll start our right turn pattern. So now it's just a matter of getting up to the station. Now the nice thing about this aircraft, of course, is I can flip on my DME real fast. I can see I'm 7.7 nautical miles away from my destination. Again, we're making this more complicated than it needs to be, but I'm just trying to show you just how you do this. Now the interesting thing is, because I'm pretty much facing the station directly, I'm basically going to cross it, and you're actually going to watch this needle dance on us the moment that we go ahead and cross that critical position that we're going to need to use. Good time to double check your mixture and everything like that. Now this is kind of neat, because you can actually imagine that if we were actually holding in the opposite direction, we'd be using the opposite approach technique. Again, let me go ahead and call that up visually so you can see it pretty darn clearly here. This is us right now. We're going to cross Norwalk VOR, take that right turn of about 60 degrees, come out a minute, turn ourselves all the way around, reacquire the 308 radial, recross Norwalk VOR, and then start flying our regular hold moments later. Again, this is what they call the teardrop entry. And the interesting thing is, what would happen if we did left turns? Instead of doing the teardrop, we'd be flying the offset entry, which is what we did before. It's also known as a parallel entry for those of you keeping score. Let's go ahead and pop back over here and take a look at how well we're doing. We're about 4.6 nautical miles away. And the nice thing is, since we have this beautiful display, you can see everything very clearly. Keep in mind, in the real world, when you're learning to do IFR flying, it's not unusual for them to actually put something up over this, so you can't cheat like I am right now. And of course, this synthetic display, you can turn it on and off as well. I'm actually going to shut that off because I don't really need it right now. Boop. So normally what we'd be doing is tracking that VOR in to get to Norwalk, then we go ahead and take our first little turn there. Or Norwich, not Norwalk. I am so sorry. I know a lot of people are going to be disappointed in me for that. My bad. I happen to come from a different state than Connecticut, and, you know, we have a Norwalk instead of a Norwich. Oh, well. Okay, so get ready. So we're going to need this timer after we get ourselves on our new heading, which, like I said, is going to be roughly about eastish. And this is one of the great things about having automatic pilot. You can basically set it and forget it. Good time to go ahead and take a look at our fuel situation. We're fine. At some point, we need to flip to the right fuel tank, though. Probably a few minutes. Speed looks good. Get ready to cross. Get ready to cross. All right. By the way, altitude can be dependent at a hold as well. They can actually tell you a hold at a certain altitude. So you just have to be very, very mindful of that. So when this needle, or I should say this number, starts getting larger, it will have told us that we have crossed it and now going the opposite direction. Again, we can also see this visually. All right, ready? Stand by. Oh, we did a pretty good job. Pretty good estimate. See the needle going, All right, let's do it. So now we are flying our teardrop pattern. We're going to fly away, which you can see now that the needle is perfectly where we want it to be. As soon as we level our wings back off, we're going to start a 1-minute timer. And that looks pretty darn good there. And as soon as we hit 1 minute, what we're then going to do is turn ourselves around and reacquire this radial. When we cross the station for the second time for us, we're going to actually start flying the holding pattern. And that's really all there is to those kinds of entries. Now, sometimes in the real world, you'll get the opportunity, or actually, in the simulator as well, they will give you a pattern entry that will have you fly straight into the pattern, which is absolutely wonderful. You could have a situation, for example, if I'm coming into, again, Norwich, not Norwalk, sorry everybody. If I was flying into Norwich here, and I was coming from this direction, I could literally just fly that waypoint and then start holding. I wouldn't have to do any of these funny course reversals because it's just not necessary. It's also worth noting that certain types of approach procedures have these as their course reversal procedure, which is a little crazy. All right, 10 seconds, and then we're going to go ahead and bring ourselves around and try to reacquire that radial. Again, this is the inbound radial. In some cases, this would be the same equivalent as your ILS as well, so you want to be very cautious that you get it right. There it is, right there. So we're going to bring ourselves all the way around to a heading of 240, and we're going to attempt to reacquire this radial, cross the station, and then come back around again. I'm sure the folks down below me are going, what is this guy doing? Is he lost? Well, kind of. Give me a break. All right. Again, this is a made-up holding pattern, but I've broken it down pretty clearly, at least I hope, to help you out understand the different pieces. Now, there's going to be no timing inbound unless you're smart. The reason I say that is because what we can do is we can actually time the inbound leg and figure out just how bad the wind is, and then use that information in order to fly our outbound leg more evenly. Remember, just because it's timed doesn't mean there isn't a distance concern linked to it as well. I'm actually going to bring this a little bit closer. Again, if we were to look at this from a different view, you'd see that we've just flown a pretty nice looking, not quite a teardrop, but basically. Looking pretty good. At any moment, of course, you can flip on nav mode. Because again, it's a radial, you can have the aircraft track it. So now we're going to track it all the way back until we get back to that waypoint. And you can actually watch visually from over here the moment that we're actually going to hit that particular point. Here we go. Okay. 125.75. Nice. We're pretty well established now. So just like we did before, the moment we get everything nice and lined back up again, I'm just going to go ahead and synchronize my heading. I like using the heading hold as opposed to the nav hold when it comes to VORs. It just seems to be a little less wonky. And again, in the real world, VORs are not that accurate. so you're going to end up having to use that anyway. Okay, so we're waiting for this particular number to drop as low as possible and then start increasing. Or we're waiting for this needle, now that we're flying the inbound course, to start going, whoa, at the moment we cross it. As soon as that happens, we're simply going to turn ourselves all the way around to the other direction and then fly our outbound leg for 1 minute, then turn all the way around and then reacquire this radial so we can use it. Really fun trick too, by the way. Whatever this cross crabbing angle, in order to keep this needle nice and centered, is going to be the opposite needle crab angle, if you want to think about it another way, in the other direction. So basically you can correct for wind just by studying this, but I'm not going to touch it because we're so darn close to it. All right, get ready. So again, we're going to be turning ourselves all the way around, and since we're taking right turns this time as opposed to left turns, it's going to be a little bit simpler. Usually holds are done with right turns. Get ready, watch for the needle to get freaky. There it is. All right. So again, we don't need to time this, but theoretically it should take us exactly 1 minute to get ourselves all the way turned around. Nice and dramatic, right? Perfection. Delightful. Okay, so now what happens if you don't have this little line that tells you how far you need to turn in order to make it travel this certain amount of time? If that occurs, just use 25 degrees of bank. You know, that's usually the accepted amount. But basically, we're not supposed to start our timer until we've turned this aircraft all the way around and now we're facing the opposite leg that we were just a moment ago. Take a look down real quick, make sure everything's good. Probably not a bad idea to switch to the other fuel tank. Well, we don't want to close it. That'd be bad. We've been cruising on that other one for quite a while now. Stand by on the timer. Starting to level the wings. Keep in mind, air traffic control is the one that's going to tell us when to hold unless it's a procedure turn. And that looks pretty good. Start. Okay. So now basically what we're going to do is fly this direction, which remember, this is the outbound leg, until 1 minute is elapsed. The moment that 1 minute is elapsed, we're simply going to take our right turn again to try to recapture that radial, which you can see we're flying exactly opposite of right now. And we know we're doing everything right because that radial is over on our right. If we were taking left turns, we'd expect the radial to be over on our left. Otherwise, we'd be terribly lost, and air traffic control would probably be laughing at us, basically. Which happens, unfortunately. You can do what you got to do, kind of a thing. All right, looking pretty good. We got 25 seconds to go. Again, we've invented this holding pattern. It's not a real one, but I just wanted you to see how you'd have to improvise if that actually came up. In the real aircraft, like I was saying before, you can actually bring up the menu and create your own holding patterns anywhere it needs to go. 10 seconds. Stand by.
Providence approach red, 647,500 feet.
All right, let's do it. So now we're going to continue our right pattern. Remember, this is still considered the entry because of the fact we haven't flown a complete lap yet. You have to fly that first basic lap before you're actually starting to hold in a pattern. So if they tell you to hold something twice, that's going to be quite a few revolutions before you manage to get back to where you want to be. Now, in a no-wind condition, theoretically, when the wings level again, we're going to be perfectly lined back up with that inbound radial. Theoretically, it should be 2 minutes when we finish it too, since I forgot to press the stop button. All right, let's see what happens. Fingers crossed. This line should be coming any second now, which it is. So I guess the wind isn't terribly strong today, because otherwise, usually there's such a bad crosswind you can't cheat like this. It should be about 2 minutes the moment we finish our turn here. I'm actually going to flip to navigation mode, because again, we're trying to capture the radial here. And about 2 minutes. Okay, perfect. Now, if we had to hold this for another revolution, basically what we do is we PC direct right up back to that radial. Again, you know when we cross that point, because this will go ahead and start getting bigger, or this needle will start freaking out on us as well. Either one will have indicated we've actually crossed that waypoint, and we can just go ahead and hold again. All right, hopefully this video has been helpful. I know there's a lot of information here that you're going to have to kind of get by just flying it a million times. The key thing is know your entries, and one of the easiest ways to use those entries, again, is to use some kind of diagram. So again, the quick entries review, if we were to proceed direct and they say hold like this, or like this, we just fly right to it and start holding. If we were coming from over here, we'd have to go to it, fly through it, come around. If we're coming from this angle, we would go to it, follow it backwards, and then come around back again. It's worth checking those out. There's a lot of really, really good diagrams available for those that you can use to actually fly these particular types of holds. And keep in mind, with ICAO standards, holds are a little different. You have racetracks and you have holding patterns, and they're slightly different from each other. Other than that, enjoy.